It's an enormous honor and pleasure to welcome Zainab Salbi. Please join me.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. What a beautiful day and what a beautiful campus. And I enjoyed my so far encounter with all the students, and I trust I will enjoy your company today. I want to start with a Rumi poem. And Rumi is a 13th century Sufi poet. And he says, not a Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. I am not an entity in this world or the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve, or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the worlds as one, and that one called to and know first, last, outer, inner, only that breath breathing human being. And I wanted to start with this poem because ultimately that I think applies to all of us. Religion, politics, nation states, all of these other identities impact us in different ways, but ultimately we are all that breathing human being. Ultimately, we are all that. And I wanted to particularly start my discussion today about Islam with that, because like all religion, Islam is not a core point of identity, but one of many points of identities. And right now we are in a contentious time. Is Islam a religion of peace, or is Islam religion of war? Is hijab oppressive of women, or is hijab liberating women? Is Sharia oppressive rules of law, or is jihad about killing? And all of these concepts that is rotating in our media on a daily basis. I must start by saying that I am not a religious scholar, nor am I an academic. What I do is I intertwine my personal narrative and my experience in the Middle East in the last few years since I switched from my humanitarian work at Women for Women to my media work in the Middle East, with a particular focus in the Middle East. So this is a personal narrative and a personal encounter rather than a scholaristic work. And I say that in front of a highly esteemed academic body, so I do not want to confuse my abilities in here. But I do think that there is a crisis right now, and Islamophobia, as mentioned earlier, is becoming the boogeyman in a lot of, in the media, in the West, in America, in France, in different parts of the world. And I think that narrative, it's causing two dynamics. It's causing Islam to have a question within itself, and it is not isolated, that question is not isolated from the Western role in it, in that discussion. In other words, I believe what's going on is not an issue of religion, but a reflection of the politics of the time. And that we have to separate the discussion of religion itself and what it is, and between the politics of the time and what it's saying. And I will try to address all of these things. I think the West plays a very much part of this discussion. This is not an isolated Islam discussion, but the dynamics of it is very, very much intertwined with Western relationships with Muslim-dominated countries or predominantly Muslim countries. The West often, especially in America, but Europe as well, claims certain values: liberation, freedom, equality, liberty, all of these things. These values, a lot of people are aspiring to achieve. It's reflected in Hollywood, in presidential talks, well, not all presidential talks, but not current ones, not some current ones. But it's reflected in how America portrays itself, or how France portrays itself, or how Europe portrays itself. But that portrayal is experienced and felt very differently to people in the Middle East. In other words, let me give you an example. Right after the first Gulf War of 1991, the biggest fashion for men's haircuts was called the Marine cut in Iraq. So it was ironic. Really? The Marine cuts, like after the US Marine, is the most popular haircut in Iraq after the Gulf War. And that's just a symbolic reflection that people do want that. That is the freedom, that is the fashion, the access, the material, the games, the whole, people do want it in Iraq or in different parts of the Middle East. And then there is certain level of the promise of America, the American promise of freedom and all of that. But people experience it differently, and they are experiencing a discrepancy between the promise and the delivery. And the people, Muslims, two kinds of levels are experiencing differently: those in the Middle East and those in America or in Europe. So I just came from France, and almost every French Muslim I talked with, they said the French promise of égalité, liberté, and fidelity does not apply equally to us. Same for people in the Middle East. The American promise of freedom and democracy is not applying equally to us. How is that felt in Middle Eastern perspective? It's felt through America's support of what is seen as dictators in the region, who are oppressing their own people. So if you are someone who is living in whatever country, actually just choose randomly in the Middle East, and your government is suppressing you from any expression, any form of expression. Some countries, they're making even graffitis illegal, jokes illegal, checking certain internet sites illegal. Everything becomes illegal. And these are very popular countries in the Middle East. So when that's happening and these countries are receiving mega aid from the US, people are seeing a discrepancy. So you are supporting the oppression of our own freedom by supporting our government, but you are claiming that you want freedom. The Iraq War had a major trauma in the Middle East. For Americans, the war is finished, we're done, our troops are out. For Iraqis and the Middle Eastern, this is an ongoing story. It has not finished. So what is seen as history or past in this country is seen as the present in that country and in that region, not only the country. And so the Iraq War came with the premise of liberty and freedom, and what people experience is an incredible destruction of the country. So that discrepancy is seen as, is leading to anger and frustration, because it's sort of, I always say, people in the Middle East do not have a hate relationship with America. They have a love-hate relationship with America. It's, I want what you have. I want to come to your country, but why are you doing this to my country, and why you're not doing this to me, and da da da. It's not a straightforward relationship. It's a tense one. Now, so that's leading to a lot of anger in the region. Almost everyone talks about a lot of the terrorist attacks that are happening in here or in Europe or whatever, and particularly the rise of ISIS, not as an action, they see it as a reaction. And so they keep something, and this is most liberal people. So everyone in here believes that these are wrong acts. Everyone believes that this violence does not work. Everyone is against killing of civilians. And everyone's saying we're against it, but you need to understand, and you need to understand, not but, and you need to understand that this is emerging as a reaction, it's not coming out of the blue. It's not crazy people coming out of the blue. They are reacting to something that we all agree is wrong. And these are concepts that human values or human lives are not valued in the same way. That when many Iraqis get killed or many Syrians get killed, it's okay compared to one person in here. So that the values of human life is not equalized. I'm telling you the narrative that is coming out of the Middle East, that if we get killed, it's okay, that if they get killed, it's not okay. That is leading to a lot of confusion also in how do you value human lives. And a lot of what's seen as revenge activities, They destroy us, so we have to destroy them. Now, this is not sanctioned by mainstream society at all. At all. But mainstream society is saying you need to understand that this is a reaction to an injustice that we all agree on. Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense. Because if I'm not, I'm in trouble. But that's a big part of issues. So I just came from Iraq, for example. The main discussion in Iraq and most of Muslims is that ISIS is against Islam, itself. Their fight in Iraq and many part of the Middle East is not vis-a-vis the West, it's actually vis-a-vis ISIS, that ISIS is against Islam. They are narrating the religion in a way that is alien to most Muslims themselves. And so it's leading that narration of the religion in a way that is different than how most Muslims grew up in the Middle East, is leading to the following. One is disorientation, I call it. So like one Libyan woman told me, so which one is the real religion? The one I grew up with my mother and my grandmother telling me stories of it, or the one ISIS is telling us what it is? Which one is the truth? It is leading to a new waves of agnostic movement, which has never existed in the Middle East, or if it did, it was definitely very subtle and very private. Right now, you see waves of people who are saying, I just don't believe anymore. This is too much, I don't believe. And this is a new wave of movement. It is leading for people who are fighting within the religion itself, saying, no, this is what religion is. And a lot of governments are doing that. So instead of fighting vis-a-vis ISIS and giving an alternative ideology, the fight is who is the better Muslim? The government of this country or ISIS? And so the governments then, what's happening is that the whole trend is leaning to the right rather than an alternative ideology, another ideology. ISIS is addressing a very, very, very particular psychology that is particularly appealing to the youth. So a lot of coverage on daily basis in the newspapers of families reporting their youth being recruited to ISIS. I just saw a picture of Tunisian parents, holding signs saying, return back our children. Because they don't know this phenomena. But what ISIS is known as doing is the following. Forget about the religion, because they're defining religion in a way that is just truly making everyone question. Not only their logic, questioning their religion itself and questioning everything. But they're doing the following. They are promising equalities for all. So come, we are going to define our caliphate, and we are all equal in the caliphate. You all have a role. Men and women have a role. I just came from Iraq last week, in which I interviewed a woman who's fighting ISIS, and she's fighting ISIS because they killed every single male member of her family, including two husbands. One killed one, she married another one, they killed the other one, her father, her 4 brothers. And she's fighting them. The reason they killed all of them because they wanted to recruit her to build the women brigade. And so whether they are building women brigade, they're giving women a role in the society. Come, you have a major role in building our nations. You are the mother of nations. They're giving employment and paying about $500 a month to $1,000 a month to a region where 60% of its population are under the age of 30, and unemployment rates goes as up as 40% in some countries, like in North Africa. And so you come, you have a job, you have a purpose, you have a mission, and they are, and I know they are giving sexual freedom defined in their own rules, but sexual freedom. In other words, in mainstream Muslim society in the Middle East, you cannot have sex outside of marriage. And so most people get married early. That's the reason why people get married early, because you cannot have sex outside of marriage. I was doing a story on a woman who married who 16 years old son wants to get married. And I'm sitting with him in Iraq, in a very poor neighborhood in Iraq, in southern Iraq. And I'm like, you're just a child. What are you talking about? You can get married right now. And his sister's like, he is not a child, he's a man. I'm like, but he's a child, and I don't understand. Everyone is poor in here. If he's gonna get married, he's gonna have a baby, and you increase the poverty level. I don't understand why he needs to get married. I'm making a Western argument about a boy, 16, wants to get married. And then all his sisters were defending him. No, he is not a boy. Don't refer to him like that. He is a man. So I'm confused in here. So I was like, well, I don't understand. What is it? And then everyone went silent. I was like, it's sex, isn't it? You know? And he nodded. And because he cannot have sex until he's married, so then that explains a lot. That is the reason why many people in the region marry at young age, because that's the only reason. So ISIS then comes and says, you can have as much sex as you want by having as many wives as you want. And that's why there's a new trend. They have a new way of dealing with marriage. You can have one wife, but then you can divorce her. You can have slaves. You can exchange. You can gift women. You can buy women. You can sell women. You can all of do these things in the caliphate. And this is not rumors. These are women I actually interviewed who talked about that. One woman I interviewed who her captor sent her as a gift for his friend for the weekend. Another one was sold for a couple of packs of cigarettes. There's a whole market of women to buy women and sell women in. And so they within their own framework of justification, but they allow for sex. While mainstream society does not allow for that, because it's competing on who is the better Muslim. But these are not issues of religion, in my opinion. These are issues of modern day politics. And these are issues reflecting the realities of the today, rather than existentially whether this is a religion of war or peace, whether this is a religion that oppresses women or liberates women, whether any of these questions. This is not a reflection of the religion, in my opinion. This is simply a reflection of the realities of the day. Now, let's get some things out of the way. Is Islam a religion of war, or Islam a religion of peace? For those who have not read, or I highly recommend Leslie Hazelton's book. The first one of them is called The First Muslim. Another one called After the Prophet, the story of Sunni-Shia divide. And in it, and I can't find a better quote than that. She says, to think that Islam is a religion of peace or Islam is a religion of war is too simplistic and is two polar opposites of each other. Islam is neither a religion of peace nor a religion of war. It has dealt with matters of war and peace as a reflection of the politics of its time. So that's, for me, was like, okay, that resolves that issue. But in all the discussion about Islam, and that's when we switched to the discussion of women, women have become the representative of that tension. Whether Muslim women are oppressed or not oppressed, have held that, they are holding that tension. I find the French argument most interesting about hijab or burkini or all of these things, because in their attempt to protect or liberate Muslim women from the burkini or the hijab, the statements someone like the Prime Minister of France makes are as patriarchal and as chauvinistic as the men who really do impose the hijab. They are both, for me, mirrors of each other. If one wants to impose it, the other one wants to impose not having it. But they are both patriarchal in dealing with women, equally. Neither one of them says she has the right to do whatever she does, and that her decision to wear it or not wear it is not a reflection of her liberty or her oppression. Now, is Islam oppressive towards women or not? Let's just talk about that. Religiously, the religion is complex. There's two issues. Their religion, their culture, and there is an identity. So let's deconstruct that. As a Muslim woman, I grew up a Muslim in a household that, I don't know, did not teach me much, actually. I mean, we learned Islam in school, and there was one religious class. And this is the same with all the countries in the Middle East. There is a class called Islam. It was the most boring class and the easiest class, because all what you need to do is memorize few surahs from the Quran, and that's all. That it was the easiest class that we all had to get A's in it. Other than that, our families were very where Islam was practiced in a cultural things. It's no different than a family that experience Christmas in here, celebrate Christmas, but they may not do anything else throughout the year. Same thing. Our Christmas was our Ramadan. It's a cultural thing. Everyone likes it. It's a religious thing, but we practice it also as a cultural thing, because it's a month where the families celebrate and you eat in communal dinner and all of these things. So other than that, there's nothing else applied. Unlike most kids, my family was very liberal and very secular. I taught myself how to pray to be in opposition to my family, as opposed to, kids usually drink and all of that to be I did the opposite. I would pray in front of the TV to embarrass my parents of how secular they are and how not religious they are. And that is the case not only with me, but most people who grew up in the 70s and the 80s grew up with that tradition. It was part of your tradition, but not a major part of your identity. It's coexisting with your identity, but you don't isolate it in your identity. When I came to America and I started Women for Women International and I became known as a women's rights activist, not one person asked me about my religious identity. No, my identity in America was seen as a women's rights activist, as a leader and the founder of Women for Women International. Not one person asked me anything about my religious identity. It is only recently when I started working in the Middle East and started being interested in Islam, because it is sort of the talk of the town right now, and I started embarking on this discussion. All of a sudden, people who I've known for many, many years now relate to me in a different way and ask me questions that I'm even shocked that they would ask me that. In other words, their relationship with me changed based on me taking on working in the Middle East, or based on Islam mostly becoming more of a highlight issue. So one person I grew up with, the religion was a side talk in my life, let's say, to then non-existence in my life, to then a prime form of identity in my life. The three forms are based on the politics of the time. In the 90s, no one cared about, it was less about Islam, and it's only after September 11 that it became a highlight of are you a Muslim or not? Are you covered or not? Why did you cover? You know, all of these things, and I'm asked questions that sometimes I find it irritating, and sometimes it's okay to ask these questions. You know, it's okay to keep that. But how people relate to you change. Same goes with a lot of women, both in here and in the region. So let's talk about the religion itself. Then we talk about the culture, and then we talk about the identity form. The religion itself, and I'm not a religious scholar, I do try to follow the news about the religion, or as much as study. Well, I did my studies a lot about the religion. The religion itself is complex about women. On the one hand, it does have an equality towards women. All humans are equal in front of God. There's a reference in the Quran when it refers to gender reference, is constantly he and she, which I find personally very progressive, because I think the introduction of he and she in our own language, at least I'm conscious about it in the 90s, you know, when you have to say he and she, he and she. In the Quran, that's how it refers to women and men. There is a lot of aspects that it's equal. The education, all equal in their access to education. All have the right to earn their own money. All have the right to be the equal in front of God. All of these things. So that is very much part of the religion. And there are also aspects that one sees as not equal between women and men. Inheritance, for example, men get twice as much inheritance as women. Divorce is contested. Sunni and Shia sees divorce law differently. Does a woman have the right to divorce or not? There are issues about what we call today civil liberties or equality that are different in Islam. But many people say that this is actually a reflection. You have to look at the religion as what are the existential laws in dealing with its own people, and what are the relevant local laws in dealing with its own people. In other words, you have to distinguish between the laws that came into in the year 700 to this particular people in Arabia who are nomadic, who are from different tribes, and that try to give them a new way of looking at life and distinguish the rules that apply to them in that particular time, versus the existential laws, that is, do good, don't lie, don't steal, the basic tenets of all religions, the basic foundations of all religions. And so you have to distinguish that, but that is a work in progress. Sharia, a scary word for many people right now, is not a document. It is not one piece of work. It's an ever-evolving interpretation of the religion that changes over time and history and political and all of these things. There is not one thing called the Sharia. It's an evolving laws that changes according to time, basically. So now, and more importantly, most Muslims do not understand what Sharia is. You don't grow up with your parents quoting Sharia for you. This actually only came with the rise of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Al-ISIS. So a lot of people, when you ask Muslims, do you know what Sharia is? Like, no, I did not hear about it when I was growing up, but I'm hearing about it every day today, so I don't know what it is. So that's the reality. Same with words like jihad. Somas, you don't hear about it. If you hear about it, you hear about it in a very, like a struggle, thrive, to do good, you know? But it's also a language that most Muslims did not grow up using. It's only surfaced as the rise with fundamentalists and radical Islamists, you know? These are relatively new terms that most people's like, yeah, I know it, but you know it, I don't know what it is exactly. So it's leading a lot of Muslims to actually think about it. Well, what is that? We have to learn all of these things. I am one of them. You know, I have to learn the religion because, you know, other than you learn how to pray and you fast, you really don't know much. You know, and you learn how to celebrate, and that's it. That's how the meaning of religion in people's identities in different ways. Now, it's very much part of it's very much part of people's identity. So while the religion says about women in different things, that interpretation changed. No one paid attention to it in the 70s when we were living in a socialist time throughout the Middle East. So we had socialist government. It was the era of unity among the Arabs. You know, a lot of socialist values. Women were encouraged to wear the mini skirts, the sleeveless shirts, drink and dance. That was sort of the trend. You know, if I take my own family as an example, my great-grandmother wore headscarf and abaya, coming from Iraq. But she owned and ran a factory. And the money in the family belonged to her. So it was a poor husband, a rich woman that the family that she belonged, and her husband called his last name, my great-grandfather, after his wife's name. So these relationships are fluid. They are not strict. They have economic and social dynamics out of it. A poor man marries a rich woman, he takes her last name. That still happens in the Middle East. No one criticizes. Actually, everyone thinks it's normal. Yeah? So you see, this is not religion. This is like it's cultural norms. My grandmother, then her daughter, married my grandfather, who had a master's degree in education. And I think in the 50s, she took off her hair cover, her abaya, as a reflection of another time. He was an official in the government. We had the monarchy. It was all about modernization of the country. So the grandmother of the women who wear the abaya the daughter took it off as a reflection that we are a modern family right now. My mother and my aunts all did not wear the headscarf. They grew up in a time of socialism, communism, all liberty, freedom. Women were traveling, doing whatever they want. The headscarf stayed in the villages as a reflection of their rural areas, you know, so it was more intertwined with culture. But urban women were liberated, all of these things. Now, same with me in my generation. Again, we are going in between. Now I grew up in 70s and 80s, a mixture between migration from socialism to capitalism in the region. Still, modernization, building, all of that. The ones that started adopting the headscarf happened in the late 80s, and the 90s, and the 2000s. And that is a reflection of the rise of political Islam, Muslim Brotherhood, Islam as a form of political resistance to what is seen as oppressive authoritarian leaderships in the region. And women, young women, started adopting the headscarf as a form of political opposition. And so, a lot of not my friends, but my friends' daughters are the ones who are wearing the headscarf as a form of political opposition. And since then, it has become more of a movement, a wave that is on the rise indeed. Now, that wave is reflective in different ways. Many women in the Middle East, there is not one reason to wear the headscarf in the Middle East. And here are the diversity of my experiences with women in the Middle East. One woman in Gaza I met. Her daughter is wearing the headscarf, and the mother as well. And the mother's like, I'm so much against my daughter wearing the headscarf. And I'm like confused. I was like, but you wear the headscarf. And she said, yes, I wore it as a pact with my best friend when we were in college, the first day in college. The two of us were going in a pact, and we're going to go and wear the headscarf. I did not like it. She's telling me that. I did not like it after a week, so I took it off. So my best friend broke up with me. She was really mad that I abandoned her. So I put it on again as a form of solidarity with my best friend. And I'm stuck with it. And it's been 20 years, and I'm still wearing it. But I don't want my daughters to do the same thing. I asked the daughter, why are you wearing the headscarf? Me and my girlfriends, we all wanted to wear pink headscarves. Do you see, this is, yes, it's intertwining with religious identity, but it's a forms of expression. Her and her friends are all wearing headscarves. It reminds me of, it's a reflection of my generation, where sororities with Greece, all wearing the same jacket with the it's very similar, but that's not the only one. There are women who are wearing it as a form of freedom, and I'm talking about particularly the Arab countries, as a form of freedom. Because if they wear that, then their families in conservative areas would leave them alone, basically. So it does give them freedom of mobility, to go and all of these things as just a freedom. Their families say, oh, my daughter is such a good, pious woman, so I'm not worried about her. And that sort of, she gets more carte blanche in movement. There are women who are wearing it for security reasons. I was just in Iraq and talked with a lot of young women who said we took it on after the last war, the second Gulf War, because security in the street became so bad that we took it on as a form of protecting ourselves. But what we do, and then how they represent, how they express it is differently. One woman said, I wear it before I leave home, and then I go to work or to college, and then that's when I take it off in my safe environment. But in the transitions in the streets, I put it on as a measure of safety. Now she took it off because safety in Baghdad is a bit better than it was 10 years ago. So it's a constant, it's a fluid identity. Some wear it as a religious bias. You know, it's indeed as a religious bias. And the scarf is usually defined in different colors and different designs and all of that. Some wear it as a fashion statement, usually 2 layers of chiffon with a knee-high skirt, but they're covering their hair. In other words, all what I'm trying to say, there are many and many and many reasons why women are wearing it, including political identity. Women born American Muslims, and I just 6 weeks ago I did a story on Islamophobia in Minnesota, where it's rising really high. All the Muslim women that I interviewed who were wearing headscarf, they wore it after September 11. And their reason is that they saw the misrepresentation of women so badly as all oppressed and all mistreated, that they started to question what is their religion. They looked into it and they said, we are wearing it to show that Muslim women are not oppressed, as a point of a statement that Muslim women are not oppressed. So I asked all of them, how much religion play a role in your decision? Not much. It's a form of identity. They are making a point that this is my right of freedom of expression. If you have the right to be naked, then I have the right to wear it. And not all Muslim women are oppressed. They are making a point of that. I, as a Somali woman, grew up in England. Why do you wear the headscarf? She said, it's a rite of passage in my family. It's our culture as Somalis. We do that. And for me, it's a rite of passage. And it has nothing to do with my oppression or any of that. As French woman, why are you wearing headscarf? And it is to be in opposition to the French government who made it illegal to wear it in high school. In other words, the more we make a big deal out of it, the more the resistance of it becomes a big deal. Otherwise, it is not a big deal. Women are wearing it as a form of expression, and particularly young women are wearing it as a form of expression. And then their reasoning is multiple reasons. It's not one reason. I asked a Palestinian woman, why are you wearing it? And she said, it's a simple thing that I have to do every day, so it reminds me to be a good person. It is a diversity of reasons. But it is their very headscarf that is making them a target for Islamophobia. Women are becoming the very symbol. This is the irony. People who are worried about Islam, the first thing they are worried about is 2 things. Is that Muslims are going to impose Sharia in America or in Europe or whatever, and that Muslims are oppressing their women. So when you ask Muslims, are you going to impose Sharia? And they're like, well, no. A, we don't know what Sharia is. It's an evolving work in progress. Second, we're Americans and we really like the Constitution. Don't people believe in the Constitution? And third, we're only 1% of this country. That even if we have this evil agenda, we actually can't do it because it's 1% of the country. And we are not one. We come from different cultures, different backgrounds, different history, different all of these things. The point of reference for these Muslim women in America, born and raised Americans, are very different than the point of reference to their migrant mothers or to myself. My form of identity as a Muslim woman who grew up in Iraq is very different point of reference. I don't need to show that I'm a Muslim. because I grew up in a Muslim country. Does that make sense? So you don't need to go out of your way to prove what Islam is. For them, they are going out of their way to prove what Islam is because they're predominantly in a non-Muslim country and they're being defined as oppressed. So this is their statement. So, and their mothers, again, if they grew up in Pakistan or in other countries, some of the women I interviewed in Minnesota, their mothers don't wear it, but they wear it. But their mother's relationship with it is a different expression than the daughters are. All of this to say, this is not a religious process. This is an identity issue. This is a political discussion right now. It is not a resolved one. This is work in progress. This is a moment of tension, and it is not resolved one. It is forcing Muslims to react in different ways, and to react, and many are saying maybe in the process we are forced to look in. So it's, how do I say it? It's forcing Muslims to perhaps look inward about the religion itself, because the religion had been ignored. And so religious people have sort of dominated the sphere of the religious discussion. And now when ISIS emerged and all of a sudden it's like, ta-da, this is what Islam is, it's forcing all Muslims to look into Islam. So in a way, my prediction that we will come out of a process with a reform way of looking at the religion itself. That ugly process of that ISIS is pushing is making everyone reassess what is religion, who are the people speaking about the religion, did we give them more power than necessary, all of these things. And that I'm talking not about ISIS, but about religious shows on TV, all of these things that have been free to say horrible things in the last few years, and they were left alone. No one talked to them. There are talk shows in the Middle East, very popular talk shows with religious sheikhs behind a desk, and he gets anonymous calls, mostly from women who are asking for advice. And some of the things he says are horrible, 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 about how you have the right to beat your wife, how you have the right to do all of these things. These guys were like, have been activated and talking, and everyone is mainstream have ignored them, except now they are seeing that they have a lot of power and influence. So it's forcing people to assess who they let to speak on their behalf, who do they not let to speak on behalf. It's forcing governments to look into the religion and their own relationship with the religions. It's forcing women to also look into the religion and get much more into the discussion of the religion itself and not have it defined by them. Though that has been a movement that came from the 90s. A lot of women said, we did not know about religion, but this religious movement is quoting the religion for us, so we have to understand it better. But also, the most important thing also that's coming out of it is that the West is not an isolated member of this discussion, is actually a very intertwined member of this discussion. One woman in Syria who ISIS occupied her town, and she said she hid for 4 months. She wore the burqa, and she had a hidden camera behind it, and she taped them for 4 months. Taped how they do, what they treat women, all of these things. And when I was interviewing her, she said, in reality, they are very, very weak. But they do one horrible act very publicly. They slaughter someone on video and they send it around the world. And all of us become afraid of them. But it is our fear that is empowering them, that is giving them power. She said, when they slaughter someone and Western countries start negotiating with them because they want whatever, or dealing with them because they're afraid of the slaughtering, we all give them power. They get an artificial power. So that's I thought, a very interesting insight about that. So what's happening is the religion is the Western discussion is part of this discussion, is not isolated, whether giving ISIS more power than necessary, whether making the issue of Islam and women in hijab more important than necessary, whether it is having this fear of Sharia and all of that more exaggerated than necessary. So what every single Muslim that I've talked with in the last 2 years, throughout the Middle East and Europe and America, they're saying is the number one action that we need to do, or they're appealing for people to do, is please get to meet a Muslim. Because if you meet them, you will demystify them and you would humanize them. Now, according to Pew Research, 50% of all Americans have not met a Muslim in their lives or do not know any Muslim in their lives. And about 47% of Americans are actually afraid of Muslims, that they will. And that there is a rise of anti-mosques being built and all of these things in different communities. According to research, number one recruitment to ISIS is not the mosque, is actually the internet. So everyone is putting all their projection on mosques and on Muslim women, and these Muslim women are being attacked in a horrible way. From internet, social media attacks, we want ISIS to rape you, all kinds of curses that I should not say in here, to a woman I interviewed, someone tried to get her off the road and get her into a car accident, to a woman had a beer bottle thrown at her, to like all kinds of things, and to a woman who was waiting for her son to pick up her teenage son, waiting for her husband to pick up her teenage son, and a soccer mom with a rifle came and got them out of the door. And the only consistency in that is that the women are wearing hijab. So the fear of Islam is that they're oppressing of women, but it is actually Muslim women who are wearing hijab are the ones who are getting all the projection of fear and the violence. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of, it's not a resolute state right now, but there are things we all can do. Meet someone, meet a Muslim, get to know. Meet a Muslim woman and get to know the diversity of these things. Second thing that all Muslim I met say is that there is 1.6 billion of us. Please understand we are diverse people like any other people in the world. That we do not stand for one thing, for one value, for one behavior. The only thing that unites all Muslims in the world is that there is no God but one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And the basic tenets: fast, pray, do good, give charity, say what I just said, the witness that there is one God but one God, and I can't remember. It's the fifth one. And do your pilgrimage. All of them are benign. All of them are benign. Had nothing, other than that, every Muslim have a different way to deal with their identity, to refer with their religion. Some it's huge, some is not, some is important, some is not important. It's a diverse group of people. So one is do that. Second, get to know, understand it better. Second, and this is because I came from France yesterday, every single one said, it is one thing for us to defend in Islam as Muslims, but it is different when non-Muslims come with us. The civil rights movement in America took another level and another dimension when white students became part of it, when white students walked with African Americans and stood up for their rights. And so there is an appeal for everyone to actually stand up for civil rights and to understand not to stereotype and not to marginalize Muslim women. I want to end with, this is a personal journey for me. And in my personal journey, every time I resisted something with anger, I became the very thing I despised. Every time I resisted, be it Saddam's dictatorship, be it oppression of women, be it every time in my life, I resist. Even when I was standing for good causes, even when I was standing for women's rights and justice, when I resisted with anger, and when anger is the drive, rather, I become the very thing I despise. When I stood up with women's rights with anger, I ostracize men. When I stood up against dictatorships with anger, I became my own dictator. It's every time you resist with anger and fear, you become the very thing you despise. Right now, I feel there is a wall of fear between the world. It takes a leap of faith for both sides of the wall to see each other the way they want to be seen. In other words, it's one thing for Muslim women to rise up and to say, this is who I am. But if they are not, that's their leap of faith, to acknowledge who they are and talk about their religion and their identity and all of that. Equally, a leap of faith is necessary and needed by those outside of the Muslim community to see them who they are. One group of people taking a leap of faith is not enough. It takes both to tango, and right now is the moment for all of us to stand up and see each other for who we are, to fight Islamophobia. I end with Rumi, my favorite poem. He says, out beyond the walls of right doings and wrongdoings, there is a field. I shall meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other no longer makes any sense. Ultimately, it doesn't matter for me what religion you're born in. Ultimately, if we see the humanity that we all share as basic humans, then we may meet on the bridge. And indeed, you are the generation that can help us all get there. So I'll see you in the bridge. Thank you.